Ojo, ojo, bravo, Joe, bravo, Joe. That's the Joe we know. That's the Joe we know. Ojo, ojo, bravo, Joe, bravo, Joe. That's the Joe we know. 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 Oh, Joe, bravo, Joe, bravo, Joe. That's the Joe we know. That's the Joe we know. That's the Joe we know.
Questa mattina ho ricevuto 2 delegazioni, una di israeliani che hanno parenti come ostaggi in Gaza e un'altra di palestinesi che hanno dei parenti prigionieri in Israele. Loro soffrono tanto. E ho sentito come soffrono ambedue. Le guerre fanno questo, ma qui siamo andati oltre le guerre. Questo non è guerra già, questo è terrorismo.
Today I had productive meetings with the leaders of the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Egypt, and I spoke to the Emir of Qatar to discuss developments in Gaza and to accelerate planning for the day after the fighting. I will get to those conversations in a moment, but first let's take a step back. On October 7th, Hamas terrorists launched a terrorist attack that killed 1,200 innocent people in Israel, including 35 Americans. It was a brutal and horrific massacre. Babies and Holocaust survivors were killed. Young people who were simply attending a concert were shot dead. 240 hostages were taken from their homes. And over then the past 8 weeks, President Biden and I have been clear. Israel has a right to defend itself, and we will remain steadfast in that conviction. We are working with Israel and our partners in the region to secure the release of all the hostages, which includes Americans. The recent pause in the fighting proved effective. More than 100 hostages were reunited with their families during this time, including 2 more Americans, and humanitarian aid surged into Gaza. As I told the families of American hostages conflate Hamas with the Palestinian people. Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization. Hamas has vowed to repeat October 7 until Israel is annihilated. No nation could possibly live with such danger, which is why we support Israel's legitimate military objectives to eliminate the threat of Hamas. President Biden and I have also been clear with the Israeli government in public and in private many times. As Israel defends itself, it matters how. The United States is unequivocal. International humanitarian law must be respected. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Frankly, the scale of civilian suffering and the images and videos coming from Gaza are devastating. I have spoken with members of the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim communities of America, including those who have lost loved ones in Gaza and American citizens who were injured and evacuated from Gaza. It is truly heartbreaking. As Israel pursues its military objectives in Gaza, we believe Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. So we all want this conflict to end as soon as possible, and to ensure Israel's security and ensure security for the Palestinian people. We must accelerate efforts to build an enduring peace, and that begins with planning for what happens the day after the fighting ends. Shortly after October 7th, President Biden and I began discussions with our national security team about post-conflict Gaza. We have begun to engage partners in the region and around the world in these conversations, and this has been a key priority over the last 8 weeks. 5 principles guide our approach for post-conflict Gaza. No forcible displacement, no reoccupation, no siege or blockade, no reduction in territory, and no use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism. We want to see a unified Gaza and West Bank under the Palestinian Authority, and Palestinian voices and aspirations must be at the center of this work. At a certain point, the intense fighting and the phase of fighting will end, and we will begin implementing our plans for the day after. To develop these plans, then, we will continue to work with both Israelis and Palestinians. But there must also be regional consensus and support. To that end, I've had a number of in-depth conversations with Arab leaders here in Dubai. Specifically, I proposed 3 areas of focus. 1, reconstruction. The international community must dedicate significant resources to support short and long-term recovery in Gaza. For example, rebuilding hospitals and housing, restoring electricity and clean water, and ensuring that bakeries can reopen and be restocked. 2nd, security. The Palestinian Authority security forces must be strengthened to eventually assume security responsibilities in Gaza. Until then, there must be security arrangements that are acceptable to Israel, the people of Gaza, the Palestinian Authority, and the international partners. And to reiterate, and this is very important, terrorists will not be permitted to continue to threaten Israel. 3rd, governance. The Palestinian Authority must be revitalized, driven by the will of the Palestinian people, which will allow them to benefit from the rule of law and a transparent, responsive government. Eventually, this revitalized PA must have the capacity to govern Gaza as well as the West Bank. We believe progress on these 3 areas, reconstruction, security, and governance, will improve the lives and livelihoods of the Palestinian people. Further, we have been clear, the Palestinians have a right to dignity and self-determination, and Israelis and Palestinians must enjoy equal measures of prosperity and freedom. They also all deserve a sense of safety and security, and a 2 when this conflict ends, Hamas cannot control Gaza, and Israel must be secure. Palestinians need a hopeful political horizon, economic opportunity, and freedom. And the region more broadly must be integrated and prosperous. And we must work toward that vision. So with that, I'll take your questions.
Madam Vice President, how did Qatar describe the state of hostage negotiations during your call today, and did they provide any reassurance of a truce in the next few days for the release of additional hostages?
So I'm not going to reveal the details of the conversation, but I did speak with the Emir, and the work and their commitment to this work is ongoing, as is ours, and our work is ongoing to support some ability to reopen the pause and to have a deal going forward where there will be a pause so that we can get hostages out and get aid in.
Thank you for doing this. You laid out your conversations with regional leaders. You laid out the expectations that you put forward. What specifically, in terms of commitments, were you able to get from them when it comes to post-conflict planning for Gaza?
Well, let me just say that the conversations that we had were very productive. And there is, I believe, a mutual desire to figure out how we are going to approach and think about the day after in a way that brings stability and peace to this region and reinforces, as I said earlier, Israel's security, the sense of security and safety for both the Palestinians and Israelis, doing what is necessary to ensure there are equal measures of prosperity and freedom and security for the Palestinian people and for Israel.
To that point, Israel has suggested building a buffer in Gaza, and they've been having some conversations about that today and for the past few days. What is the U.S. position on it? And one more, if I may, you mentioned, sort of bolstering the Palestinian Authority so that they can, rule both Gaza and the West Bank. What, according to you, should happen to get the Palestinian Authority to that point where they can govern both Gaza and the West Bank?
Well, as I said, we have to revitalize the Palestinian Authority, which means giving the support that is necessary for good governance, understanding that on the issues that must be resolved as we think of a plan for the day after, it is about good governance, which will bring transparency and accountability to the people of Gaza and the West Bank. It's also about what we need to do to recognize there must be some plan for security for the region, and I suspect as a plan develops, it will take into account interim and then longer term. And finally, what we must do in terms of rebuilding Gaza and a commitment to that.
The buffer zone, you didn't answer the question.
What is the question exactly?
Israel has been suggesting creating a buffer zone in Gaza, Madam Vice President. What is the U.S. view on that?
We have not weighed in on that.
Thanks, Madam Vice President. I wanted to ask, what evidence do you have that Israel won't just be receptive to the conversations and the asks the U.S. has made in terms of protecting civilian life, minimizing harm to civilian life in Gaza, not just receptive to those asks, but actually following through and really acting on them? Do you have any evidence that Israel will listen?
I do believe that they have listened, and I can assure you from the beginning, the President has been very direct and clear about our perspective. For example, that humanitarian laws, the rules of war, must be followed, which includes what must happen in terms of giving humanitarian aid, no intentional targeting of civilians, and we have been very clear also that one, Israel has a right to defend itself, but we also must take into account that far too many Palestinian civilians, innocent people, have been killed, and Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians.
To that point, in the first day after this temporary truce had ended, Israel killed 200 Palestinians, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Is that minimizing harm to civilian life? Is that acceptable?
I don't have the details to tell you exactly who was killed, but I will say this. We have been very clear about where we stand on this, which is innocent civilian lives should not be intentionally targeted, and that Israel must do more to protect innocent life in Gaza and innocent civilians in Gaza. And we've been very clear about that, and we continue to make that point, not only privately but publicly as well, as you see. Okay, thank you.
International calls for restraint in fighting are growing since the brief truce ended between Israel and Hamas. Well, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has now said that many civilians have been killed in Israel strikes in Gaza and that the humanitarian law must be protected. Take a listen.
We have been very clear about where we stand on this, which is innocent civilian lives should not be intentionally targeted, and that Israel must do more to protect innocent life in Gaza and innocent civilians in Gaza. And we've been very clear about that, and we continue to make that point, not only privately but publicly.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also delivered some of his strongest remarks to date over Israeli actions in Gaza. He urged for the need to protect civilians as the intense fighting continues.
You see, in this kind of a fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative.
After these comments by senior U.S. officials, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel has no desire to harm the population and that it is continuing to work in coordination with the U.S. and international organizations to define safe areas for Gaza civilians.
אנחנו קובעים כל הזמן בתיאום עם גורמים בינלאומיים וגם בתיאום עם ידידינו האמריקנים. אנחנו קווים אזורים בטוחים שהאוכלוסייה יודעת שהיא יכולה להתפנות לשם. עשינו את זה בצפון, ואנחנו נעשה את זה גם בזירות אחרות. זה חשוב לעשות, כי אין לנו שום רצון לפגוע באוכלוסייה. יש לנו רצון להימנע מפגיעה באוכלוסייה, יש לנו רצון עז מאוד לפגוע בחמאס.
Here with me now is Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, sir. Let's start with the hostages. Hamas still has more than 130 hostages, including the U.S. government believes 8 Americans. What should Israel and the U.S. do right now to get them out?
I guess just keep talking, and I would put more pressure on Iran. You know, Hamas doesn't exist without Iranian help. Our soldiers are being hid in Syria and Iraq by Shiite militia controlled by Iran. So what I would do is flip the script here. I would go to Iran and say, listen, you need to tell Hamas to let these hostages go. If you don't, you're going to start paying a heavier price.
And you think that just that pressure on Iran will actually produce hostages being returned? Do you think it's potentially as simple? I mean, there's nothing simple here. I don't want to oversimplify it, but that is... No, you're right. Here's what I believe. If Iran felt they were threatened by Hamas's behavior, they would have Hamas change their behavior. But Israel's going back to the fight. So here's the big question. Vice President Harris has said, Israel has the right to defend themselves. How you do it matters. The Secretary of Defense said it'd be a strategic failure for Israel to have killed too many Palestinians. I don't want any innocent Palestinian to die, but how do you do this? Vice President Harris, tell Israel how to destroy Hamas in a way not to hurt
innocent Palestinians, and I'll pass it along. I don't know how to do this because Hamas is integrated into the apartments, the schools, and the hospitals. They have tunnels all over the place. The reason so many Palestinians are dying, I think, is because Hamas wants them to die. So if you got ideas about lessening civilian casualties, let me know. I'll tell Israel, or you tell them directly. But the idea of Hamas still standing when this is over would be the ultimate strategic failure.
Well, the reason she said that, obviously, and what Secretary Austin said, which I'll get to in a minute, is because they believe that too many Palestinian civilians have been killed. Do you agree with that?
Well, tell us how to do it differently. Yeah, what is too many people dying in World War II after Pearl Harbor? Did the American public worry about how many people were dying to destroy Tokyo and Berlin? I know this is not the same, but it's similar. I mean, after October the 7th, Israel's at total war with Hamas. What they did, you won't even show on television, probably because you can't. So the bottom line here is no Republican believes this, by the way. No Republican is telling Israel to change your military tactics, because I don't know how to change them. I think the goal of destroying Hamas is important for Israel, really important for the Palestinians, and Hamas is making it impossible for Israel to fight without hurting innocent people.
There's the humanitarian aspect, which we were just talking about. Then there's the strategic question, which you have experience with in other parts of the world when the U.S. has been in conflicts. And so I want to go back to what you alluded to, which is what the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said yesterday. He said, if you drive civilians into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat, which he's saying that civilian casualties could create even more enemies. Does he have a point?
No, he's so naive. I mean, I've just lost all confidence in this guy. How about focusing on protecting our soldiers, men and women in Syria and Iraq? Strategic defeat would be inflaming the Palestinians. They're already inflamed. They're taught from the time they're born to hate the Jews and to kill them. They're taught math by if you had 10 Jews, you kill 6. How many would you have left? It's like this is a tranquil population only inflamed after Israel goes in to defend itself. Is really naive. This is a radicalized population. I don't want to kill innocent people, but Israel is fighting not just Hamas, but the infrastructure around Hamas. Look what happened to the Israeli hostages when they were presented to the Palestinian population. It's beyond naive. Strategic failure is letting Hamas stand. But here's the question for the world. When Hamas is defeated, what happens next? That's when I want the Arab world, the United States, and the Western world to come in with a governing plan different than we have today for the Palestinian people. I want to come in for a better life for the Palestinian people after you destroy Hamas.
Well, a couple things there. One is, you said you've lost confidence now in Secretary Austin. You've been a supporter.
Well, I like Secretary Austin personally, but this war has shown to me he doesn't understand. If we were attacked like this, which we were in 9/11, if somebody had called for us within 2 months to have a ceasefire against Al-Qaeda, we'd have laughed them out of town. We'd have run them out of town. You know, Secretary Austin is telling Israel things that are impossible to achieve. Secretary Austin, the reason Palestinians are dying, Gaza is so condensed. Hamas has tunnels under apartments, under schools, under hospitals. If you've got a better idea of how to destroy Hamas, pass it on. Quit criticizing Israel in public.
I want to move on, but just to quickly follow up, you well know that General Stanley McChrystal in another war has called, I think what Secretary Austin was referring to, insurgent math. Each innocent person that is killed ultimately creates new insurgents. You agree with that?
I get the theory, but here's what I would tell General McChrystal and Austin. The population has been radicalized for decades. You don't get that? Do you know what they teach in the schools? The idea that somehow Israel is radicalizing the people in Gaza is ridiculous. They've been radicalized by Hamas for years.
Okay, Senator, I want to talk about what you and the Congress will do. As you well know, that there's a big tug of war over foreign aid to Israel and Ukraine. You and your fellow Republicans want to include border security and new immigration restrictions. You haven't been able to make a deal yet. Would you still vote for that foreign aid if immigration is not included?
No. I think there are votes for Israel apart from the package. Republicans overwhelmingly support Israel, so do most Democrats. Republicans are divided on Ukraine. Republicans are 100% behind strong border security. If you want aid to Ukraine, we need to control our southern border. We're having, Dana, 9,000 people a day come for the last week. There's no end to this wave of illegal immigration. You have to change your asylum laws and your parole laws to stop the flow. So I will not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. Reform asylum, reform parole is possible to do. Democrats don't want to do it. All Republicans want to do it. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves.
Senator, you said this week that Texas Governor Greg Abbott should send migrants to states like Rhode Island and Oregon and Connecticut, where Democratic senators oppose this new stricter asylum provision that you want. Have you heard back from Governor Abbott?
No, I'm going to go visit. So here's the problem. You got 11 Democratic senators signing a letter resisting changing the laws that attract so many illegal immigrants. 6 million people were encountered in 2023. Texas has been overrun. The Democratic position is remain in Texas. What I'm telling Governor Abbott, why don't you send thousands of these illegal immigrants to the states where these senators wrote the letters, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Oregon, and let them understand what it's like to live with a broken border. The towns in Texas along the border are virtually being destroyed. 6 million people have come into our country illegally in FY23 with no end in sight.
And what do you say to those who say that these are human beings and they're not pawns on a chessboard, and just moving them to different states may not be the most humane move if you want to make a political point?
Well, is it inhumane to live in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Oregon, Rhode Island? It's about making it real to people who refuse to fix the problem. I've been involved in immigration reform for decades. This is a national security problem. We have a completely broken border. Afghanistan started the rise of terrorism. Now you have the Hamas attack in Israel. This is not about fixing a broken immigration system. It's about fixing a broken border. To my Democratic colleagues, if you don't understand what it's like from illegal immigration, overwhelming effect on your communities, you need to experience. Look what happened in New York. The governor and mayor of New York are begging for help. So to my Democratic colleagues who want Texas to bear this burden, forget it. They should be sending them to you. It's not inhumane to live in Connecticut.
Let's talk about the 2024 campaign trail. Donald Trump called Obamacare a disaster last night in Iowa after reiterating his calls to repeal it. You, of course, voted to repeal Obamacare when Trump was president. Do you think that this is a winning issue right now? Would you like to see another vote again? Trump is elected?
Here's what, good question. This is what we tried to do when Trump was president. Let's block grant the money that we have in Washington to administer Obamacare is controlled by bureaucrats you'll never meet. Let's take that money, send it back to the states, make sure it's spent on health care, and see if governors and state legislators can come up for better ways. I'm okay. I'd like to get the money and power out of Washington back to the states. I think we should block grant it back to the states rather than let bureaucrats in Washington run our health care. Socialized medicine doesn't work. Get the money and power out of Washington, get it in the hands of the people closest to the patient.
Senator, before I let you go, I want to ask you about your fellow Republican former Congresswoman Liz Cheney. She has a new book out. She sat down for an interview this weekend, and she said she's worried that the chance of a second Trump presidency means the U.S. is, quote, sleepwalking into a dictatorship. You, of course, have endorsed Donald Trump. What's your reaction?
I think a continuation of the Biden presidency would be a disaster for peace and prosperity at home and abroad. Our border's broken. The only person really going to fix a broken border is Donald Trump. When he was president, none of this stuff was going on in Ukraine. You know, Hamas and all these other terrorist groups were afraid of Trump. I think Liz's hatred of Trump is real. I understand why people don't like what he does and says at times, but in terms of actions and results, he was far better president for Biden. And if we have 4 more years of this, Liz Cheney, then we won't recognize America and the world will be truly on fire.
Okay, Senator Lindsey Graham, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And speaking about that, James, you recorded a video and posted it on social media. It's gotten some traction describing what you're seeing in Gaza, in particular with the children. Let's watch that real quick.
More children with the wounds of war, with the burns, with the shrapnel littering their body, with the broken bones. Inaction by those with influence is allowing the killing of children. This is a war on children.
Limited food, water, medicine, this is what you're describing, just chaos. How do you live like that? What is the mood from these people you're speaking with?
Utter panic. I've just been in a hospital with bombardments going on all around. I must say, as I was there, 10 children came in with the wounds of war, 10 maybe in a couple of hours, with horrendous wounds, with shrapnel to the brain, with eye injuries, with third-degree burns. It is a war zone, that hospital. So there is panic among the people, absolutely. It changes every hour here. People don't know where to go. They are almost in a trance. Children in the hospital, Isabel, are grabbing me. Mothers are grabbing me saying, take me somewhere safe. A little girl held me and I tried to take a moment always. She just had 2 empty water bottles. She's in a hospital. Please, can you put some water in them? The water in the taps, it's salty, she can't drink it. So it's utter panic. People are being told to move from A to B. It's like a chess game, except that it ends in the death of children. It's not a game for them. The safe zones, I think, Isabel, is so important. It's a false narrative and it's a dangerous narrative. People don't have the transport, they don't know where they're meant to go. They're places in the desert, they have no water, they have no food, they have no protection in these places. And so when they get there, disease stalks, and when they quite often get to these places, they are bombed. It's a very dangerous narrative that's being shared. They are not safe zones, they will be zones of death.
Right, and let me give a little bit more context on that. You're speaking about those flyers that the IDF dropped with those numbered zones telling people to go to safe areas. But based on what you're saying, it sounds like there is no safe area for them to go. And also, they were QR codes in Gaza where internet connection is spotty, so even getting that map is questionable.
No, spot on, Isabel. There is no internet access. You might get Wi-Fi if you're in a home. There's no 4G or 3G, 5G. So people get these things and then 5 minutes later there is a bomb, or on the way they're going there is a bomb, and they've already, remember, these people had their homes bombed in the north and saw a family member, a sister, a mother die. Then they moved to a shelter which probably got bombed. They've come down south. There is a panic among people here that they simply now do not know where they're meant to go to.
Yeah, and Netanyahu has said that the war will continue until, quote, we achieve all of our goals. What do you make of that, and what does that mean for Palestinian civilians?
Devastation. The world has to now be aware of the scale of this. We're at 6,000 children killed, more now. There's no doubt some of the children I saw this morning, the severity of their wounds, Isabel, they will not make it through the day. Many children there. So the idea that it continues, a war on children to continue whilst the world watches, I think we have to accept now in a civilized society, those democracies that have a say here, that silence is complicity. And they need to look into the eyes of mothers who've lost the ability to protect their children, of young students and the brilliant brains that I encounter all the time who are utterly fearful. They have to accept that they are allowing the death of these people. As you and I have spoken, there's been another 2 very large bombardments, Isabel. It is probably the most intense day we've seen. Certainly it's the most intense day the South has seen, which is another narrative we've heard, that we are told, governments, we will not possibly allow what to happen in the South has happened in the North. Well, it's happening in the South. I can bear witness to that.
Look, I'll give you an example, Mehdi. Originally, we estimated... No, I'm answering your question. Allow me to answer your question. I'm answering your question directly, if you'll allow me. We originally said in the atrocious Hamas attack on our people on October 7th, we had the number at 1,400 casualties, and now we've revised that down to 1,200 because we understood that we had overestimated. We made a mistake. There were actually bodies that were so badly burnt, we thought they were ours. In the end, apparently, they were Hamas terrorists. when we make a mistake, we admit it.
Short on time.
Why does that give you permission? Why does that give you permission to accept Hamas's numbers? I don't understand.
I didn't ask about Hamas numbers. I said to you that your military
spokesman... you were quoting to me before Hamas numbers, Mehdi. You were quoting to me Hamas's numbers.
Because the entire UN and the human rights community and the American intelligence community on Friday said they trust those numbers. But you're dodging my question, Mark.
I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that's true.
Why did your military spokesman...
You said that Hamas committed atrocities, right? Okay. Do you call the killing of 20,000 Palestinians an atrocity? Does that befit the term atrocity?
Saeed, I was speaking to the intentional murdering of civilians that we saw Hamas commit. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there is anyone questioning that Hamas intentionally killed civilians.
And you don't think that Israel intentionally killed civilians?
We think far too many people... I have not seen evidence that they are intentionally killing civilians. We believe that far too many civilians have been killed. But again, this goes back to the underlying problem of this entire situation, which is that Hamas has embedded itself inside civilians, inside civilian homes, inside mosques, in schools, in churches. I'm surprised I don't hear more people saying, why doesn't Hamas lay down its arms? Why doesn't Hamas move out of schools? Why doesn't Hamas take additional steps to protect civilians? Because we think they should, as we think Israel should.
Silence is complicity. And in the face of terror, we cannot be quiet. That is why we are all here today, to speak about unspeakable acts. On October 7th, Hamas brutally murdered 1,200 souls. And in some cases, they first raped their victims. We know this from eyewitnesses. We know this from combat paramedics. We would know this from some victims if more had been allowed to live. Maybe then one would be standing beside me right here to state something that should not need to be stated. Rape should never be used as an act of war. This truth must be upheld despite the politics of our time, because no matter what marches you are attending, what flag you are flying, what religion you practice, or if you practice none at all, there's one thing we can all agree on. There are exactly no circumstances that justify rape. Rape is targeted. Rape is terror. Rape is torture. But until recently, wartime rape was largely tolerated. If you think over our history, throughout the history of man, women's bodies were just considered part of the spoils of war. It wasn't until 30 years ago, when the mass sexual violence of the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, the DRC, caused global women's organizations and human rights organizations to speak up. And in these halls where we are today, change happened. In 1993, the UN Security Council created the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia with an unprecedented commitment to prosecute rape as a crime against humanity. The next year, that same commitment was brought to the tribunal for Rwanda, and it has been seen many times since. None of these efforts have done enough to prevent wartime rape, not even close. But real progress has been made. That is why this moment is so critical. We have come so far in establishing that rape is a crime against humanity, and we have come so far in believing survivors of sexual assault in so many situations. That's why the silence on these war crimes is dangerous. It threatens to undo decades of progress, to undo an entire movement. The world has to decide who to believe. Do we believe the Hamas spokesperson who said that rape is forbidden, therefore it couldn't have possibly happened on October 7th? Or do we believe the women whose bodies tell us how they spent the last minutes of their lives? Who are we going to believe? Today, a new generation gathers. We gather in these same halls to reclaim our communal voice. I call on all women's organizations, every single one, every woman, every man, to unite by speaking out about these atrocities. This is as true when it's happening in Israel as in Ukraine, Ethiopia, Sudan, in any country. I especially call upon global political leaders to step up. We need to hear your voices saying loudly and clearly, rape is unacceptable. And then we need those words backed up with action. It's inexcusable when those who have the capacity to make a difference don't. We call upon the entire UN to formally condemn Hamas for these rapes, make sure there is a full and fair investigation, and hold the terrorists accountable. The ground we have gained in protecting women was hard fought. It needs to be built upon, not lost. For over a decade, I've been urging women to lean in. Now I call on everyone to speak out. And if the world isn't listening to us, we're just gonna have to speak louder. Anyone who has a mother, a sister, a daughter, a wife, or a friend should join us to unite against rape. This goes beyond politics. If we can't agree that rape is wrong, then we have accepted the unacceptable. Then the question will be not what is happening in the Middle East, but what is happening to our humanity.
We're talking about comedy, and SNL kicked off its 49th season Saturday night, and guest host Pete Davidson gave a very personal perspective on grappling with the atrocities happening in the Middle East. Take a look.
This week, we saw the horrible images and stories from Israel and Gaza. And I know what you're thinking, who better to comment on it than Pete Davidson? Well, in a lot of ways, I am a good person to talk about it because when I was 7 years old, my dad was killed in a terrorist attack. Sometimes comedy is really the only way forward through tragedy. Tonight, I'm gonna do what I've always done in the face of tragedy, and that's try to be funny. Remember, I said try. And live from New York, it's Saturday night.
And is finding a reason to smile again really one of the only ways out of the dark, and especially for kids. He was 7 when he lost his dad in 9/11. And, you know, his mom inadvertently put on
Eddie Murphy
Delirious.
Which is not, it's not appropriate, but it's hilarious.
Well, it's absolutely appropriate. No. And it made him laugh. And his mother, he said his mom was going to take it out, but it had been the first time she'd seen him laugh.
Yeah. You know.
And so is it so, do you think?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot this weekend. I was at the Wine and Food Festival, and we've had a lot of conversations, and I think it's something we do daily on this show. Look, what do terrorists want? Terrorists want to terrorize us. They want to have us living in fear. And I think the way you fight terrorism in our own little ways that we can do it from our lives is by finding joy, by finding light, by continuing our lives, by living, by not being afraid of being who we are and doing what we do.
Well, and also, wait, sorry,
go ahead.
No, you.
I was
Okay.
just gonna,
No, you go. Well, there's a famous story. Sorry, there's a famous story of Steven Spielberg when he was filming Schindler's List. Got just so dark and in such a bad place. He had a standing call with your friend Robin Williams, who would just do a 15-minute stand-up bit with him, just to get his spirits going and to like kind of talk him off the ledge. And it shows there's this therapeutic quality to humor that can, even in the darkest moments, give you a little bit of light and levity that you need.
It's what I'm relieved about with the writer's strike and hopefully the SAG one as well, is that the arts and like escapism through not only funny stuff, but reality. I had to do it at the end of last week. We were all talking about tuning out. So I watched a little Golden Bachelor and felt a lot better. I'd recommend it. But one other thing that Pete Davidson reminds me of, and I do think of people like him with 9/11 being in my head, is one of the most unifying things in a divided time is to remember that there's a common enemy right now, which is terrorism. It was terrorism in 9/11, and it's terrorism again. And I think when you remember who that is and you come together with that, that's one thing that was unmistakable being in this country after 9/11. So I encourage people to remember, as bad as it is, that that's the same thing we're going through again.
Yeah, and I had no idea his father was a fireman who died during 9/11, and that to share your grief and to share your stories is also, I think, an important part of it, because we need more compassion in this world. We need more humanness in this world. It's not always this against this, against this, against this. We're all human beings, and we need to somehow try to find that part that is missing so often, I find.
To your point about uniting against terrorism, it occurred to me this weekend. You know, we're sending 2 aircraft carriers to the Middle East. There's about 10,000 servicemen there and women. We have Marines in Hormuz, and we have got a senator from Alabama in the U.S. Senate who is holding up over 350 appointments of admirals and generals and leaders in the military. Senator Tuberville, it is time that you stop this stupidity, because we need our military leaders confirmed. Why is he doing that? I don't know. He's so aptly named Tuberville because he's got the common sense of a potato.
Okay.
Ojo, das ist Joino, das ist Joino. Ojo, bravo, Joe, das ist Joino, das ist Joino, das ist Joino, das ist Joino. Ojo, bravo, Joe, das ist Joino, das ist Joino, das ist Joino.
One of the least discussed atrocities in the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel is coming into horrifying focus tonight. Stories of women sexually assaulted and brutally killed. Tonight, investigators from Israel are revealing eyewitness and victim accounts, some reviewed by NBC News. They describe gang rapes, the bodies of deceased victims bearing signs of mutilation, and what many endured in their final hours at the hands of terrorists. Tonight, President Biden calling the accounts appalling. The Israeli military, meantime, says it has killed several Hamas leaders as it steps up its ground war in the south. But that is also leaving Palestinian civilians with fewer and fewer places to shelter. We have to warn you tonight, some of the images and stories are quite graphic. Let's start with NBC's Hala Garani.
On October 7th, Hamas attacked within Israel's borders with a wave of terror, murdering over 1,200 people, including entire families. And Israeli investigators say there is growing evidence that Hamas unleashed another kind of horror against women.
Something so horrific happened, and the world should know.
We spoke to Mirit Ben Meir, who's helping lead the investigation of allegations of repeated rape and sexual assault by Hamas.
Where does your investigation stand?
We have eyewitnesses that are slowly arriving and giving testimonies.
Disturbing accounts about October 7th, including this woman describing how a Hamas terrorist, quote, laid a woman down. He is raping her, then they pass her on to another person, telling investigators the woman was alive and bleeding. Another chilling eyewitness account from Yoni Sadon, telling the Sunday Times he was at the music festival where Hamas slaughtered hundreds of Israeli concert goers. He hid under dead bodies, saying he saw a, quote, beautiful woman with the face of an angel and 8 or 10 of the fighters beating and raping her. When they finished, they were laughing, and the last one shot her in the head, he said. Hamas has denied committing sexual crimes against women. Israeli officials say the investigation is challenging because most victims were killed. But among the evidence seen by NBC News, graphic photos of women's bodies with obvious signs of sexual assault, including some naked from the waist down.
Some of the terrorists that are interrogated, they're saying that this was happening and this was done.
First responders describing naked female bodies tied to beds. NBC News also reviewing this Hamas document that Israeli officials say was carried by Hamas militants on October 7th with instructions on how to say, take off your pants in Hebrew. The UN facing backlash for its response, some deemed too slow, including this protest Monday. Critics blasting the Secretary General for taking 7 weeks to publicly call for an investigation of Hamas and sexual violence. And the agency UN Women for not putting out a statement until last Friday. Tonight, the agency telling us in part, within days of the horrific attacks, UN Women began offering concrete support to the UN Commission of Inquiry, which is investigating these matters.
We feel like the world has turned their backs.
Miriam Schleer runs a rape crisis center in Tel Aviv and says Israel's critics are downplaying, even dismissing, alleged Hamas sexual violence.
You say that people can be opposed to what's happening to Palestinians,
Absolutely.
but at the same time they need
Absolutely.
to be
You can,
sympathetic.
yeah, I mean, there's two things that don't have to do with each other. I feel for the suffering of Palestinian civilians. It has nothing to do with the fact that there can never, ever, ever be an excuse for rape.
And Hala, President Biden, as we mentioned at the top of the newscast, has been speaking out about this. What's he saying?
Well, he is saying that the sexual violence, the quote, sexual violence by Hamas is unacceptable and that the world cannot look away. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as well, blasting what he calls the silence of women's rights organizations, Lester.
Hala Garani, thank you. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
It is not the Israeli Defense Forces strategy to kill innocent people. It's happening, I admit that. Each one's a tragedy, but it's not like the Israelis are sitting around every morning and saying, hey, how many more civilians can we kill today? Let's go bomb a school or a hospital or a residential building and cause civilian casualties. They're not doing that. They're trying to go after Hamas, and it's a very difficult task. When Hamas, oh by the way, in addition to deliberately slaughtering people, is deliberately hiding themselves in residential buildings, in hospitals, in tunnels, putting the innocent people of Gaza directly in the crossfire. Now you tell me, is that right?